joined live by our correspondent Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv. Stephanie, evening from Beijing. Up to so far, how are both sides, both the Palestinian and Israeli sides, viewing the first round of talks?
Well, there wasn't much optimism to speak of at all at the start. It seems that the optimism slightly grew as people here on the ground were seeing that an actual session was finished, that the two sides got through a session together, that they delivered statements, and now there's an announcement that there's going to be another session. Round 2 of talks is going to ensue here in the coming weeks. People are slightly allowing themselves to be optimistic, but not a lot. If you look at the polls here, 61% of Palestinians say that they don't believe there can be peaceful coexistence between the sides. That's versus 56% of secular Israelis who do believe. So certainly the differences are there. That's why we are seeing the talks and coming together and trying to come together again. Those differences are not new. This is a very complicated process, and again, that's nothing new. Well, to help clarify, perhaps shed some light on this process, I'm joined here today by my guest, Yoav Limor. Yoav, thanks for coming in and joining us.
Good afternoon, Stefan.
Good afternoon. Yoav is a defense analyst, and he'll talk to us a little bit about the process and what we can expect to see. Yoav, this is in the infant stage. This is in the very, very beginnings, but we do know we're about to go to round 2 of the talks. So, realistically, looking at past history, the history of negotiations, what do you think will be happening in round 2 as they move to this region?
As you mentioned, most Israelis and Palestinians are not very optimistic or expect much of those negotiations. I mean, we are mentioning within a couple of months in September the 20th birthday of the Oslo Peace Accord. So we've been through so many rounds of negotiations to know that the beginning is very, very, bloomingly and optimistic, but the ending was always very doom. So this time, I believe it's a bit twisted, a bit upside down, and maybe it's for the better for both sides. I mean, we begin with very low expectations, and it can, from now on, it can only be built and get higher. But if you ask me what to look for, I would look for leaks. I would look for noise. If we hear nothing coming out of Washington for the next few weeks and months, it means they are talking business. If we do hear something, it means that both sides are looking to come back home and gain political points within their people. Netanyahu and Livni on the Israeli arena, Abu Mazen and Arikat on the Palestinian arena. But again, if they go to Washington and the Americans say nothing and the Israelis and Palestinians say nothing, it means they deal inside seriously and they mean business. And those are the signs I would look for within the next few weeks and months.
Another sign that you talked about, you said to me in the very, very beginning when these talks were announced, you said a sign to look for, keep an eye on Hamas and keep an eye on the Jewish settlers because they could torpedo this entire process. Tell me what you mean by that. How could they do that?
Listen, Hamas is stressed. Maybe it's in the worst political situation it has ever been since it took power in Gaza in 2006. Iran abandoned Hamas. Hamas is Sunni, Iran is Shiite. Surrounding the fight in Syria, they detached one from the other. Hamas is no longer an Iranian front. They went for the Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt, but they lost power last week, so they lost their front in Egypt. Now Abu Mazen gained point because it went back to negotiations with Israel, and prisoners are going to be released, something that was exclusively kept for Hamas for the past few years. So they lost the Egyptian side. Now Abu Mazen is gaining points. They might look for a way out of that plunder, for the thing that they're locked in, and the way is going back to fight Israel. So I would look very carefully at Gaza, what's going on in there. Are they going to shoot at Israel, fire rockets at Israel? That's one arena. And the other is the right-wingers in Israel. I mean, people in the extreme settlements who fear that Israel might give up the territories, so they might try and do something which will stop the process. So I would look on those two ends and keep an eye open on them. But the vast you started by saying that the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians do not believe something will come out of that, but most of them support the process, and most of them hope that peace will emerge in the end. So it's a bit dubious. I mean, you get both sides, and if at the end there is something, it's very early. It's premature. But if at the end there is something, I believe Netanyahu is going to pass the referendum like that. Because when a prime minister is bringing something backed by the army and the secret services, which will all back it eventually, because otherwise there won't be an agreement. They will put the obstacles on the way. I believe that the Israeli public will follow him, especially if it's a right-wing prime minister. We saw Begin doing that in Sinai in 81, 79, 81. We saw Sharon doing that with the disengagement from Gaza. If Netanyahu gets to that point, I'm not sure he'll get there, but if he does, I believe that he's going to pass it.
And you said getting to that point, and you also mentioned the military. Of course, you're a defense analyst. So I'm going to talk about the military. Let's say we do see that the sides get far along. They get to a point of coming to agreements about a sovereign state, let's say, for the Palestinians. One of the questions that has arisen is a military, an army for the areas of Palestine, a Palestinian state. Would Palestinians have an army? Would they have weapons? Who would they ally with?
They do have weapons at the moment. They fight terror at the moment. I mean, they have soldiers equipped and educated and taught, etc., but they won't have an army by the way we see it. They won't have tanks, and they won't have aircrafts, because Israel won't let it happen. And it was agreed upon in the past. Both sides, Israel and the Palestinian Authority, agreed on that point in the past. Who should they be protected from? I mean, if they have peace with us and they live alongside Israel, why should they have an army? If they don't mean peace, so we shouldn't go there. I mean, Israel protects itself by the Israeli Defense Forces from Syria and Lebanon and Iran and eventually Hamas and, terror groups. Who do they protect themselves from? I mean, it's a big question. If they need an army against Israel, one Israeli should ask himself, should we commit peace with them? So it's a tricky question, but if you go to the bottom line, they won't have an army. They will have, obviously, a state. But many states in the world don't have armies. I believe they won't. It's something that the Israeli services army will insist on, and I believe there won't be an agreement if that point won't be agreed in the beginning.
A lot of tricky questions, a lot of questions to be answered, a lot to go through as we move forward the next stage, round 2. Yoav Limor, thank you for joining us.
But Stephanie, be optimistic. I mean, it could have been blown up in the air after 1 week. It took 3 years together. They did get there. They did talk. They did smile yesterday in Washington, and they're going back next week. It's a good sign to begin with.
Okay. Thank you. Good signs, says Yoav Limor, defense analyst here in Israel. Back to you in Beijing.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Stephanie Fried reporting from Israel.